Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 29th of July. Well, we got a little bit of the decline coming through off of the weak sell signal here. We did dip down lower on the cyan, which gave bulls a little bit of a secondary kind of pop. We do have higher pivots now on the cyan. That's going to suggest lower, and obviously we can see continuation of that little bit of lower. We don't have any real positive turnaround yet. It would have been interesting if starting this day the steel had continued lower, because that's really the sign you're looking for, is for that steel to dip below and then come back above. The next positive move you would get would be the steel rising above the cyan, but that would be short-lived as well, simply because you'd have a continued breakdown of the green and red going lower. So yeah, not terrific. Now, intraday, let's look at that real quick, because it was a really beautiful setup as we came down with the sell signals, broke above here, started to make the rollover, and then it got continued confirmed with the higher cyan readings there, and so we cascaded lower. But then once we reached the bottom points, I talked about this on StockTwits as well as I put it on our Skype chat. Once we press above that negative 13, becomes a positive for the steel as having rolled around in the circular tubular nature of the DOC, and thus effectively coming up from underneath. You have the modest weakness on the pivot lower of it, but at that particular point you now have a rising red, and it was above this previous pivot. And so what I started to do was mark the various indications of each of the little lines. So if we put arrows here, you would first have the green crossing over. Obviously that showed up with the yellow candle. You can expect some weakness on the first pivot lower. That's your opportunity to buy, particularly when it took out this previous pivot mark right here with the red, and so that happens right there on this bar. And you then broke into a new level with the green, which is a higher pivot than this previous one as well. And then it was just a matter of looking for it to come across right over here. And then once that started to take place, you had the continued rising red, which overtook the fact that you ended up with the cyan back above the green, but still below zero. And as it progressed, though, you would have been looking for your first lower pivot, which would have occurred right as you dipped below the cyan right there. But for the fact you were making higher red pivots, would have been the biggest drawback to that end. You weren't overbought at that particular point. Where you did get overbought was right here. And your first lower one at that particular point would have been the most attractive short of the whole setup at that particular point. And then from midpoint, this one, now this is the, just so you know which program, buy sell A's. Now, interesting thing about the buy sell A's, while I'm in the middle of talking about that, now converted all the different alerts as well as the numbers can be turned on and off all the way down through. And the value 1 represents true. Any other number you put in there will create a false category. So it doesn't matter whatever. You can put 0, 3, 9. Doesn't make any difference. You can even add a 0 to the after the 1 because only a 1 will be the true configuration for allowing it to continue. So that's the way all of the new setups. And I've added to this buy sell A, the yellow candle. I will also add a couple of the other colors from like C and that, which are like the pink, which is up at the pink, is at the topping points where we get this breakout of the cyan above steel, as well as having green dipping lower for your usual sell points. Haven't put that one in yet, but that's next. It sort of combines all of those multiple ones into a single category. Now, from our aspect on this 5K, when we had the nice run up, the next category would be looking for positive extreme retraces. So positive extreme retraces would take us all the way to this candle right here, I believe. Yep. So that would be the expectation on a retrace. As you can see, we just literally broke through that. No surprise there. This positive extreme right here was already retested. From that daily standpoint, there's no change in the sell signal. So I said anytime you get pops, you want to look for your first short opportunity. Now, those of you with the indicators, obviously that becomes a very easy target here once we moved above with the cyan at this particular point above the green and your red's dropping. You knew you weren't going to get much action with the deep steel. It wasn't until a little bit later that we started to move forward, and it was pretty close to the exact same price tags that this took place at, which was right about here. And so coming fast forward right there, you get the move above And finally, that separation is beginning again. Now, if the steel dips back below the green here, we'd be looking for the potential as that being another buy setup. So still soft. It's not horrible. It's just soft. I mean, that's the easiest way to describe it. From a 50K standpoint, separation narrowed quite nicely. Coming in through this, it ended up buying that first configuration on it, and then in the second place bought it up there. I would be cautious of the second one when it happened because I was already wanting to be conservative off the first buy setup, simply because it started to get overbought midway into it, right about here. And so it's that usually that first pivot down is the beginning of your little bit of a lower weakness. Cyan popping back above the green here. Interesting because you've got to get above that negative 7.5 here on the red, and if that starts to roll over here, that could be potentially even uglier than before. We still have a dip below the red line. Well, no, that was actually back right over here, so we cleared that pretty much on this dip. Was very bullish, being higher on the extreme, which was nice for it, and that showed up very well on the 5K. Do I expect it to come back? Yeah, I still think we've got some more weakness built into this setup. Sure, we can get a spider. If we break above this 7.5 on the 50K, then I think that you may have broken any short excitement in the near term, and that could lift things up a little bit. But this is kind of sort of ugly. I know it's a long time of talking about that to go over it, but needless to say, it's important because it becomes a pivotal time. I still like puts on any pops, just like we were talking about from last Thursday when the intraday signals first came in and for Friday's report. Here you can see NASDAQ likewise same. It's going to be potential of an improved buy setup. You're still having declining green in that, but the fact that the steel's coming back from underneath, that's a positive sign. It's still going to dip down, but likewise, you don't have it here. So the steel never dipping below the green or the red. That means any pop in the YM is not likely to survive, and that becomes critical unless this steel can move up above that negative 13, in which case then you'd have the complete turnaround because of its tubular nature. USO, that's not pretty. No shock with that. TLT. Still on a positive run there, though you've got the cyan moving above now, and that if that starts to create the separation, then I would look for a deeper decline in that. It's been overbought, and we've seen the overbought here for quite some time. And I think that's a little bit of the indecision as to people not really knowing which direction rates are going to go in the near term, at least what market force rates are going to be, not necessarily what the Fed is doing. Two very different concepts in that. Gold, it's still within its weak zone here. You had the positive move of the steel moving above, and you can see that creates a little bit of a oomph to it when that takes place, but this isn't by configuration any stretch of the imagination. And the euro continuing its decline. I think it's a beautiful separation with this. No stopping it at all. Now you do have shorts covering in this pretty significantly going through here so far, because now you've moved all the way to the negative on this. You just didn't have steel drop, but a steel could spike above the plus 13, which would turn things around for a buy, much like it happened over here. Happened briefly back over here. It was even before the screen showed up, and that left a little bit. Still kind of rocky. I don't see any improvement here in the extreme, letting you know that there's still no new volume buyers as far as central banks trying to push this back up. They're content with where it is. Imagine even let it drift down to the 133, 132 range. It wouldn't have too much of an impact, at least on the U.S. side. X continuing to do more of what it's set up for here with this beautiful safety zone configuration. No objection to that whatsoever. CLF, a little bit more of a bonus out of it. The steel opened up, continuing. Now it did get overbought, and you're very close to what that ultimate orange target is. That could be a nice short. If we look at the intraday on it, you can see what happened from there. Ended going through, and it was interesting because we started the morning, and it started to retreat quickly, and from a 15-minute standpoint, was pretty solid on the decline, but then you ended up actually improving the red and the cyan dipping lower. And it was an opportunity to buy on that full retrace coming back in there, and sure enough, that paid off very well. That was a nice run. And then the one we expected to go lower was WLT, because we needed to fill this positive extreme right here. And look at how beautifully it did that. Came right to it and turned around and popped up right from it. I love it when it does that. Makes for an easy go of things. Let's go ahead and put up our matrix. We can run through some of these numbers. You know what I'll probably do is come up with some specific targets on retrace values, particularly for those of you who want to have put such of an idea of generally where we're looking at. I mean, as you look at the daily chart, there are not any real specific strong ones. We have to look at the 50K in some cases to try and gauge some of the potential retraces, particularly with the deep red, and that becomes a good guideline at this particular point, barring any new information. Lots of selling on the Dow there. So if I put that back up real quick, we can take a look at it. Somewhere in the 64-ish range, 63, right in there, would be ideal for a full retrace on the red, the deep red candles. Beyond that, we do have this dip right here. Last one, the red, 1949. That would be my secondary target. Much more expanded decline in that. So just throw that out there so that you have it in your memory banks. I would write it down because that makes it more effective to be able to hold on to it and refer back if things start to move in that direction. Apple continuing to look nice. As long as that looks decent, not going to be so easy for the market to completely collapse on that. Amazon, tried to warn people who thought that buying this dip was a smart idea, and no, we had that it was just going to come back to it. In fact, no change in that. But not everyone wants to listen to those things. They all think that there's a bargain just because something sells off. Sometimes it sells off for a reason. Baidu still looking good. You know, people thought, oh, well, okay, this one's gone too far. It's going to have to pull back. You know, that was modest pullback. Yeah, you've gotten to an extreme point now here on the green. When we start to see that pivot down, then yeah, I would expect to start seeing a little bit more of the retrace within these positive extremes. But whew, that is really low for the cyan, and a nice separation for red-white. But I'll have to go back and check. I don't know that the red has made it above 13.5 in almost only a few stocks. Apple, I think it's done it a couple of times, but that's a very rare thing. That's beyond a hyper bullishness. Hard to match those kind of readings. The FAS, it's continuing to look weak. It's held up very nicely. I mean, it came right off that ABM support. Problem is, once you test that, and if your numbers get weaker, if we dip below here on the red line, then I would expect it to break, and could break more significantly than some may be expecting. Would have been stronger in my mind if we had moved up towards the 0, and then you get the kind of breakdown readings. Then you usually end up with a bit more exacerbated decline. So I think that could limit it. Facebook, it's been okay. There's nothing there. We had the steel dipping within the bullishness, so we were expecting a modest weakness, nothing to get excited about. And sure enough, it's all we got is a little excitement, and it came right back to it. They're just clearing out the weak stops from the gap, and they love to do that. That's a good opportunity to be able to jump back into anything if you missed it. Google, nothing special there. Netflix has been a nice runner for a long time, and then we got our sell signals, and then it just keeps getting uglier. And again, the steel did not dip below, so this I would expect to continue more in its malaise. And you dip below the red line for the first time the other day at 24, so it could have some potentially more weakness. PCLN, which had been in a modest buy turnaround, produced a nice little pop there, but coming off of the magenta candle, 1 to 2 days is usually what you expect, and then for it to turn around back down to the south side. At this particular point, though, the cyan dipped lower. You've got steel moving lower, so if steel pops up, you could get a nice little burst out of this. Take it back up to the 50 range easily before a fall. We'll be able to see the next declining phase in it. There hasn't been anything going on in Tesla from the weakness that we saw there, though. This finally pulsing around to a bit of a degree here. You've got green moving ahead, almost have cyan dipping below steel, or because in this case you don't have really steel rising above cyan, which would be a little bit more positive. That could potentially turn into something because you've got a higher pivot going on in there. So maybe an opportunity to start looking at it from an intraday to the long side. And Twitter. And for indicator survivors, I would believe that by Wednesday, because I want to have some more of those adjustments done, I will be sending everything out for to be ready for the start of the new month. That way you'll have everything in plenty of time. Twitter, yeah, it's okay. There's nothing. See, the problem you got here is you don't really have a secondary red pivot to give you a strong indication on this one, so you just have to rely on the fact that fine, you're above the red with the green, so that's holding it up. Continued weakness though with the steel, particularly if it dips below the cyan. Now you need to see cyan move above to continue the decline on it. Otherwise, it's just pretty much trading in a consolidation. So flatness. Again, I ran too long. Sorry about that. We'll talk again tomorrow. As always, trade well.